Hello, Danielle. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Parev inchpases.
Love them.
So thank you so much for being here. Really, really delighted to talk to you. I was thinking a lot about your story and so much creativity, Danielle, so much leadership, so much impact that you've done in such a short amount of time. I mean, you are a relatively young person. And I was just reflecting back on our text messages and then on our conversations that we've had. So I'm just delighted for you to be here. So we're with Danielle Mikaelian, and Danielle is a law student at Harvard Law here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You've got some pretty impressive academic and personal achievements. I'd love to begin with a little bit about your pre-Harvard life. So, kind of where you hail from, where you kind of knocked around as a kid and grew up. Of course, you did attend Columbia University, where you studied English Lit before you made your way into Harvard Law. So let's just begin there. Like, Danielle, tell us the story of where you came up from.
Sounds good. I am originally from Southern California,
Mhm.
specifically from a town called Thousand Oaks.
Nice.
I spent my childhood in California public schools through high school, where
Hmm.
my high school was fairly large for a public high school. It was about 700 in my year.
Wow, that's a big school. Yeah, yeah,
It was a big school, and
yeah.
it was also a very competitive public high school. So
Mm.
I think a lot of people just were trying to really reach these heights, and there was a lot of competition. Unfortunately, when it ended up getting to the college admissions process, everyone just wanted to get in everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah. Every Ivy League, every whatever, right? Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And obviously, so I went through high school. I've always been very academically motivated.
Hmm.
I was specifically gravitated towards English literature and was always at the top of any English class. I was a big reader throughout my entire life, and that was really just a driving force for me throughout my entire
Mm.
childhood.
Hmm.
In elementary school, I was that student in class where I would be reading under the table instead of listening to the lecture because I loved reading that much.
Yep, yep.
And that love just continued. And I end up in high school still really gravitating towards English literature. So I became president of the literary magazine at my high school. And
Oh,
then
that's cool.
on top of that, the headquarters of one of the biggest publishing companies for academic textbooks happens to be in my hometown. So
Hmm.
that's Sage Publication. So I ended
Okay.
up learning there as well.
As a high school student.
Yes, as a high school
Wow.
student,
High
and then
school student.
also my first summer after I started my studies
Hmm.
at Columbia.
This is probably an unfair question, Danielle, but when you think about English literature, I know I have my favorites. Anybody in particular has ever kind of been with you your whole journey or really resonates with you?
Do you mean author
Yeah,
wise?
author. Yeah, author wise. Yeah.
I definitely think my favorite authors have changed over time. I've
Sure.
definitely
As you've
gravitated.
changed as a person, I'm sure, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've definitely over the years gravitated towards British literature.
Mm,
One author I've read a lot of is Jane Austen, but
sure.
overall, I like to diversify what I read. So I
Yeah.
always tell people one of the hardest things you can ask me is what my favorite books are or my
Yeah,
favorite
me
authors,
too.
because as an English major, I've just read way too much and you
Yep.
lose track of everything over the years to the extent it's really hard to rank those books or authors against each other.
It's so hard, and that's why I said it's probably an unfair question, but sometimes individuals do have a ready answer, so that's great. Have you spent any time in Concord, Mass, and kind of exploring what Concord, Mass has to offer in terms of Hawthorne and Louisa May Alcott? And I mean, these are American authors, but even still, like anything there.
Not at all,
Uh,
actually. So maybe
yeah,
I have to do that in my
yeah, yeah. Come out this way. That'd be super. Yeah. When you one of the other things, Danielle, that I really was thinking a lot about is you mentioned how academically motivated you've always been. Um, you came into Columbia, and let's for a minute we'll talk about the change from California to New York City. But while you're doing that, also maybe Danielle, can you talk about the fact that you did so many leadership superlatives, I guess I'll call them, while you were at Columbia. I think 10 executive boards, if I counted them all up correctly. Um, what was that like? And where did you find the time, I guess? But maybe first kind of give us a little insight into your cross-continental trek.
Definitely. I was always of the mindset that I would further my education to
Hmm.
the best degree possible and take advantage of opportunities as they come.
Mm.
So I remember I applied to schools across the country, and
Hmm.
my parents and I had discussed the admissions process really with the thought of, okay, you'll stay in California and go to a UC unless some really amazing opportunity comes through.
Presents itself, right? Yeah, yeah.
And then I get into Colombia. And to date, that was one of the happiest days of my life. I had toured Colombia when I was a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
And that was my only time in New York before going
Wow. Well, yeah, being a Southern California kid, it makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. But I had just loved the campus. I don't
Mm.
even think at the time I realized how much of a major shift it would be to move across the country and go to New York City. I really was just like, I really love this campus. They have a great English program. Columbia is the location of the Pulitzer Prize. And
Mm.
I just really loved the idea. But it was definitely a huge jump. And
Yeah.
I am so grateful looking back that I made that jump just because Columbia truly was transformative to me. I
Mm.
grew up in a pretty quiet suburb. I really had no
Sure.
idea that in these major industries like investment banking or even corporate law firms like the one I'm going to be going to existed. And a lot of those places have their headquarters in New York City. So I end up at Columbia, and it definitely was a big learning curve, but it made me just so much more knowledgeable. And it
Mm.
also really exposed me to so many cultures and
Yeah.
people from all different walks of life. Columbia has the second highest international student body of
Oh,
any
interesting.
school
Mm.
in the United States.
Mm.
And due to that, I actually have a lot of friends that are not from the US. And
Right.
again, growing up in Southern California, you're not being exposed to people from different countries on the daily.
Right.
But it really helped me develop a more global perspective going to
I'm
Columbia in the first place.
I'm smiling too, Danielle, because what you said about, oh, I grew up in a relatively quiet suburb, so the sort of the culture shock, if you will, or whatever of New York City. I don't care where you grew up. Nothing is like New York, right? I mean, nothing, compares. Even if you grew up probably in a major city like San Francisco, it's still not like New York, right? I mean, to your point about what is the epicenter of finance, technology, so much, right? It's amazing. When I was an undergrad at Connecticut, my roommate's brother went to Columbia, and he was doing journalism and international relations, and we would go visit him all the time, right? And that was always a really great experience going and hanging out with him, Columbia's campus, and just having a lot of fun, right? So it was really great. Um, you didn't like I said, you were, I don't know how you found the time, but you were on so many different executive boards and things while you were at. How did you sort of find, your footing there in terms of what you decided to get involved in, Danielle, and not get involved in?
I often tell people that I think a lot of the best learning experiences occur outside of the classroom.
Mm.
And for me, I was just so grateful for the opportunity to attend an institution like Columbia in the first
Right.
place that I really wanted to be in roles that were impactful in a positive way for my peers.
Nice.
So in that regard, I was on the executive board for all the residence halls.
Mm.
Was involved with student council for a bit. I actually served as wellness chair for the undergraduate and graduate schools and spearheaded wellness programming for the overall university.
That's cool.
So I really gravitated towards roles like that where I
Yeah.
felt I could make the
Make a
most
difference. Yeah.
impact.
Yeah.
And I think I really enjoyed just being in management positions, being able to oversee programming and really see my ideas come to life on behalf of my fellow students. So
Yeah.
roles like that were very fulfilling. And then in addition to that, because of my Armenian heritage, I
Hmm.
really took it upon myself to make the Armenian club at Columbia a lot more active. So
That's so cool.
I actually went through the list of 80,000 names, page by page. I was looking for the stereotypical. If anyone's tuning in, Armenians, most of us have like an IAN or YAN at the end of the last name. So I'm going through, it's 80 names a page. You can't, there's no way to get them all up at once. And I'm
Right.
just like,
Scrolling.
IAM, YAN, and obviously you might be missing people, but I just found everyone I could, and I sent a cold email and was like, these are my thoughts. This is what I want to
That's
do.
outstanding.
And we became such an active club. We built up a full exec board. We became fully active again. We had barbecue
Outstanding.
nights. We met with different government officials. We even met with the Prime Minister of Armenia at one
Mm.
point.
Hmm.
And it just really became one of my most fulfilling experiences in undergrad. But I had to, set up the structure for that to happen in the first place.
I'm laughing about you going through 80,000 names. What did you get membership up to for the club at its kind of height?
We had about 40
That's great.
people.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Yeah.
I mean, that was because Columbia really never had many Armenian undergrads. I always was 1 to 2
Mm.
Armenians in
Sure.
the undergrad per year,
Hmm.
but they have more graduate students. So the way that worked is we just were very inclusive.
Yeah,
And no
sure.
matter what school you were at, if you're a master's student or whatnot, like I reached out, I tried.
Everyone was welcome.
Exactly. And that's how
Nice.
we
Nice.
managed to get those numbers, because otherwise it would have been a very tiny undergraduate Armenian club of like 5 people max.
5 mighty people.
Exactly.
Oh. So clearly you had an outstanding experience at Columbia. It still clearly carries with you to this day. You went cross country. I'm going to guess, like we talked about briefly for a second ago, to the chagrin of your close, tight-knit Armenian family. We're from the same type of family, I can tell. Then you graduate and you decide to stay on the East Coast. What drew you to law school, Danielle, I guess, just to start with?
I think I say at a baseline level that I just wanted my words to be more impactful. As
Hmm.
an English major and someone who has an editorial background, you can tweak words, you can tweak grammar, but you're really not having a real world impact at all.
Hmm.
So for me, the law was a path to making my words more impactful. And then
Mm.
I think also, obviously, as an Armenian, there's just like that sense growing up of just lived injustices occurring and just wanting to combat those through more effective mechanisms.
Outstanding. Yeah. And everyone knows the Harvard law application process is pretty significant, right? And it's in what it does. And one thing I was remiss in mentioning a moment ago is you were the 2021 Columbia Student of the Year. And I'd love to understand a little bit more about what that entails. But I know a lot of people applying to Harvard are extremely successful in their own right. You have to be, right? So, do you feel like the Student of the Year recognition helped your application? And also, I guess, ultimately, what do you think was the tipping point for you, Danielle? I know it's probably hard to tell, but, do you feel like there's something in terms of, for anybody who's aspiring to a law school at the level of Harvard?
I think when it came to that award signifies a few things, right? It
Mm.
really showed that I had a strong track record in student leadership. And to
Hmm.
be fair, it was actually one of a few different leadership awards I did receive from Columbia.
Wow.
I think I really had a strong track record in student
Mm.
leadership compared to most undergraduates across the country.
Hmm.
And I do definitely believe that it helped me stand out, because I have shown that I am a go-getter when I get to a campus. I try to positively impact the community. When you're admitting me, you're not just getting a student that attends class, you're getting a lot more than that. And in that regard, I get to Harvard, and in my first year, we have like sections, superlatives, and mine was most involved, and I was like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? At Harvard Law, this group of 80 people is labeling me as the most involved. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing.
Right.
But I think that definitely helped
Sure.
regarding my application. But beyond that, just law school admissions are very stats based. I had
Right.
the LSAT score, I had the
Right.
GPA. It was really just having things beyond that that showed again that I would be an impactful member of the community.
Nice. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. In terms of your continued focus on involvement, I mean, you just said, most involved, right? You were highly involved undergrad at Columbia. You're a highly involved law student at Harvard. A couple of things we talked about, again, back to the Armenian, affinity. You are part of the Armenian Law Student Association at Harvard. You're part of the Harvard Business Law Review. You're part of the Cyber Law Clinic, and I'm not exactly sure what a clinic means, so maybe you could explain that to me. But that's a lot again, that you're really involved in, and I'm curious about how these kind of projects, how these sort of clinics are continuing to sort of shape your experience at Harvard and shape the lawyer that you hope to become, Danielle.
So, first of all, what a clinic is,
Mhm.
let's go into that first. Clinics are programs through which you can basically provide pro bono legal help to others under the
Out.
supervision
Okay.
of attorneys. I obviously do not have a law license yet,
Right.
but
Right.
through Harvard's clinical programming, I have been able to work firsthand with clients and
Mm-hmm.
help them, whether it's writing legal briefs or helping them draft contracts, because I have lawyers supervising me. So
Got you.
I did do the cyber law clinic. That's our clinic for internet law and technology. And then
Cool.
something I've been doing actually this entire past school year during my third year is I actually work as a legal fellow through the
Mm.
Federal Reserve of Boston, and that's
Mm-hmm.
actually also through Harvard's clinical programming. So I'm supervised as I'm conducting all of this legal research and so on.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. That makes a lot of sense. Like when you think clinic, you think something clinical, right? Like, and here you are providing services under the mentorship of a practicing attorney for folks that need it. That's great. So as you're like doing, it's a practicum really for you, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
That's outstanding.
I think just generally, again, this goes to my point of I really believe that there's a lot of practical learning
Hmm.
gained outside of a classroom environment.
Right. Applied. Yep.
And I've fully taken advantage of that. I do take a lot of classes pertaining to leadership and management,
Mm.
subjects like that. I'm cross-registered at Harvard Business School this
Mm-hmm.
semester and
Mm-hmm.
that last semester as well with their startup incubator class. And then I'm part of all these different student organizations where I'm again learning these very practical legal skills.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know, so it's so important when you think about the application and the applied, right? We're both in an academic setting, and I'm always encouraging my own students to be really mindful of, applying what they are doing, right? The theoretical is great, but they need to show and demonstrate their application, right? So look at internships, look at fellowships, look at opportunities where even out in the community where you can apply, right? It's so important to your point about the practical aspect of it. Tell me what the Dean's Scholar Prize is, Danielle.
So you receive the Dean's Scholar Prize. It's arbitrary if every class offers one if you receive the top grade in a class at Harvard Law School.
Mhm.
So it's solely just an award that recognizes academic merit.
Okay, and you've won it, like no big deal, right?
Exactly.
I love it. I want to talk a lot about your community advocacy and community impact, Danielle. I know it's really important to you and a significant portion of your journey as a scholar, as a leader. You have a huge commitment to community, which is very impressive. But before we do that, you're a young person. You're in arguably the second greatest city in the world. I would say the first, but we'll leave we don't want to get in a fight between Boston and New York right now, but arguably the greatest city in the world. There's a lot here that you could do. So how do you be a young person? How do you have fun in addition to what you are doing with your, let's not even get into your community work yet. Let's just talk about the academic commitments that you're under, Danielle.
How I have fun through academic commitments?
Oh, no, no. How do you have fun despite or in spite
Oh,
of your academic commitments?
okay. I definitely take advantage of Boston. I'm very
Yeah.
involved in AGBU Young Professionals, and
Oh,
I
cool.
all of their events in Boston. Beyond that, I go into the city with friends, as any 26-year-old girl probably
Will
does.
do. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's beyond that, even though a lot of my involvement is academic, there's also social
Sure.
activities that as well. So one of my big commitments at Harvard has been serving on the exec board of the business club at the law school. And
Oh,
that's
very cool.
been highly social throughout the years, even though we are hosting all these CEOs and law firm leaders and so on
Mm-hmm.
a week basis. We also actually have retreats a few times a year. So I'm going to Vermont to
Oh,
ski
cool.
weekend. And then we actually do an annual international trek over spring break to a
Oh, very
different
cool.
international destination. A lot of that is networking oriented. We go to law firms, we go to companies, and just, again, really build that global mindset when it comes to just being business minded. This year we're going to Singapore, so I'll be going to Singapore with them.
Oh, wow.
So
That's really
those are great
impressive.
experiences
I'm
as well.
I'm highly envious of that. Wow. So it sounds like you are really good, Danielle, at integrating sort of all of your academic pursuits and your social pursuits kind of together. It sounds like, right? So it's like a lot of times your social pursuits are integrated into your academic when you talk about going to Vermont for this or Singapore for that. So that's outstanding. That's outstanding. There's so many impactful projects that you've been involved in, Danielle, fundraisers, initiatives you've led. It seems like, clearly leadership is really important to you, and being a leader and demonstrating your leadership and continuing to hone your leadership skills seems to be really important to you. But also seemingly important to you is community and community impact and advocacy. I mean, lawyer, you will advocate for people through your entire career. Was that born out of home? Where did sort of your desire to be focused on advocacy and community impact come from? And you're in some high pressure settings, Danielle, but still you're sort of finding a way to focus on that. And I find it very, very admirable, but I'm also very curious about sort of its genesis. It's where it came from.
I think on the advocacy side, it really is tied into my Armenian heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something I recognized when I went to Columbia specifically as one of the only Armenian students in the entire undergraduate population,
Mm-hmm.
just as an Armenian, we have not sent many people to these schools. We have not really been in these spaces. And then on top of that, people really don't know much about things like the Armenian genocide or
Right.
the conflict that recently occurred in Artsakh. I have so many very intelligent peers who just do not hear anything along these lines. So I think, for one, I just became very passionate about giving Armenians a voice in these spaces,
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
take advantage of my time at these institutions. I joke with people that if anyone mentions an interest in foreign policy, politics, anything, I pause and I'm like, okay, we're going to have a discussion right now because I want everyone to join the Armenian caucus someday. I want, all these Harvard law grads who go into Congress to be so shockingly pro-Armenian, where people are like, how is
Where did this come from? Yeah.
exactly? Which okay, that might.
They're like, oh, Danielle, I get it now. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be a little unrealistic, but I definitely think I have been able to make a name for myself as an Armenian advocate. And to that point, Harvard Law this past year received its first admit directly from Armenia. This
That's
girl was
outstanding.
educated in Armenia her entire life. And before she even gets to campus, the dean of admissions emails me and she's like, okay, I'm connecting you two right now.
Yeah. Yeah. You need to be the welcome committee. Yeah.
Yes, I'm the welcome committee. And then from there, she gets to campus and I'm starting to get texted every day. She's like, every time I tell people I'm from Armenia, they keep turning to me like, oh, have you met Danielle yet? Yeah. So that definitely has influenced the advocacy side. And then
I love that.
for the community piece, I think it might be in part just like moving across the country and making that adjustment and just recognizing really the value of community. And
right.
Again, I just really enjoy giving back and being positively impactful. So that often leads to community.
It's hard, right, Danielle? I think sometimes for people who are not Armenian to understand this really deep and true connection that we as a people have with one another, right? And it's funny when I'm always amazed, you could literally walk up to another Armenian on the street that you don't know, but that one commonality is just so deep between us, right? That you just don't see. You see it in other ethnicities, sure, but I think there is a very specialness about it when two Armenians who don't know each other meet and realize that the thing that they have in common is their heritage, right?
I fully agree. And in that regard, I have been so thankful to be Armenian when I'm making all of these big geographic changes and moves, because every single time I've moved, whether it was to New York or Boston, I've immediately become involved in
part of a community.
And it's just been wonderful having a community outside of school that I can rely on.
Yeah.
Beyond that, even before coming to Harvard, I interned for the Armenian National Committee of America. I took part in their Rising Leaders program. I was very involved in initiatives where the Armenian community has continued to support me, and I really, really value it.
I love it. When I was an undergrad taking international economics, we had to, do a capstone paper on an economy. And I went to my professor at the time and I said, I'm going to do this on Armenia. And at the time it was as the Soviet Union was breaking up and the Commonwealth of Independent States was being formed. And it was hard to think about the Armenian economy at that time because it didn't really exist yet as an independent economy, right? And she looked at me and she said, I'm not even going to try to talk you out of this because I know that this is, she's like, this is going to be really hard. But at the same time, she's like, I'm not even going to bother to talk you out of this because I know this is what you're going to write your paper on. And I just know that there's no convincing you otherwise. Right. And I feel you would be in the exact same response as I was if you were in that same situation.
I actually have been in that same situation. I took a January intensive course, which was fashion law, and you can write the final paper on absolutely anything pertaining to fashion. And I wrote it about Armenia as a growing fashion hub. And
awesome.
To be fair, there isn't even that much there, but there's actually been a few major brands like Montclair that have started producing in Armenia. And I actually found the person in charge of the company that has made those links to the major companies and has had all these products sourced in Armenian factories and so on. And I interviewed him and wrote this entire 15-page paper. So I absolutely resonate with you, where I joke with people. I'm like, if I can find a way for this Armenian tie-in, it will happen.
Well, and Danielle, I'm old, not unlike you. So, I didn't have the internet. And she was like, you're going to have a really hard time getting information. But believe it or not, the AGBU was a huge source of information for me at that time. So, you mentioned fashion law a second ago and the intensive that you did over January break. I know that you've also focused on sports and entertainment law. You were one of 12 law students nationally selected as part of the Ackerman Scholar Experience. You went to Panama. Tell me about that.
That was an incredible experience beyond the beachside resort that they had this conference. I think that I have always been very passionate about giving back myself and mentoring the next generation. So
Hmm.
that program specifically, it's actually very high profile entertainment and sports law attorneys that want to give back. So they actually fully fund 12 law students nationally and allow them to attend this conference to start building their networks and just
Mm.
insight into the field and all of these recent developments. So I did go to Panama and I was able to sit in on all of these panels, meet some attorneys for very high profile celebrities and so on. And it was just an incredible experience.
Outstanding. Had you ever been to South America or Panama before?
Not at all.
No, so definitely the full, and it sounds like you were able to take advantage of the entire experience. That's outstanding. How did that opportunity present itself to you, Danielle? Did it come to you? Did you seek it out?
So, funnily enough, it was at the very bottom of a Harvard Law School Career Center newsletter over the summer. And I think I might be the only student who read through the entire
Fired
thing.
newsletter.
It was just funny to me because when I started telling students I'm doing this, I applied to it. They were like, "Where was that opportunity?" Because it was like the heart of the summer, and
Yeah.
I just really do believe in taking advantage of the opportunities in front of me. So I do. I pride myself on reading through all these newsletters, looking at the websites where opportunities are posted and so on. That's one of the ways I obtained my Federal Reserve position as well. It was
Mm.
posted through Harvard on a specific page. And I always believe in putting yourself out there and trying for opportunities. If someone's going to reject me, they can do that after I've tried, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to count myself
I
out
love that. Yeah.
without putting my best foot forward first. So I
That's
think
so
that
great.
yeah, I think that mentality has actually led to a lot of success on my end, just because
Sure. Sure.
I really am not deterred by the possibility of failure. I
Right.
just go for it and we see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, we move on.
That's outstanding. And so many people are deterred by the possibility of failure, right, Danielle? And they don't even want to try out of fear of failure. Is again, you're a very driven and motivated person who doesn't seem to have that sort of fear, but I know you must have some fears. Is it just something that you've been always able to surmount? Was that a learned behavior? How have you been able to kind of work through that?
I think that I've always been a very resilient
Mm-hmm.
person, but
Mm-hmm.
I think when you know yourself and you know that you're living by your own values and you just have a lot of confidence in what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
you eventually won't be deterred. And again, I see the bigger picture. As much as people might reject me for one opportunity or so on. I mean, in the past, I remember, for instance, like I was a student at Columbia and I applied for the undergraduate law review just to get on, and I was rejected as a first year.
Sure.
And here I want this legal experience because I'm pre-law, and I'm like, oh no, I really want to get into this. It's like a community of 70 undergraduate students with the same interest, and I come back the next year, I get on, and then I'm elected to the board for the next 2 years eventually. But
You showed them.
but this is my point, right? Like a setback like that can be temporary. You can
Right.
always advocate for yourself and see if you can turn things around. But it really is looking at that bigger picture and knowing what you're working towards. And I've had enough workout where I'm like, okay, you know what? Like my first year summer, I was sending in applications left and right just because I wanted a very competitive position in corporate law to have that practical experience. I applied to like over 100 jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my first year of law school, which is like the hardest year of law
Oh,
school.
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm doing this on top of my classes and everything. And I'm just like sending in applications, doing all these callbacks, trying to get one of these very competitive roles. And I get one New York offer. And so many other rejections, to be fair, so many other rejections. But that one offer is like a light in the darkness. And then I get to go to New York in the summer and have this very practical experience I wouldn't have had otherwise. So
Yeah, no, so true.
I think seeing my work pay off in moments like that really drives me forward.
Continues to drive you and fuel you forward.
Right.
Danielle, you have this such an interesting combination of, the English literature, what you're doing now as a law student, um, and maybe that is the sort of genesis for your creative pursuits, but you have lots of creative pursuits in addition to your advocacy and community impact pursuits. You're a published poet. You write. Um, Tell me a little bit about how your writing, flows from and how it kind of contributes to your personal, your personal sort of satisfaction or maybe even your professional development. I'm really curious about your own reflection on your creativity. And again, the balance of that plus all the other things that you do.
I think creativity is so important when it comes to different endeavors, regardless of what they are. I
Hmm.
think I have applied a creative mindset to a lot of my leadership roles. And
Mm.
in that sense, I also just believe in having my own side hobbies. So,
Yeah.
a- as you mentioned, I have been writing poetry for various years. When I was a Columbia undergraduate, I was enrolled in multiple poetry workshops at Columbia.
Mm.
Also took their beginning fiction writing class just to build on those skills.
Hmm.
And post grad, I have continued writing. I write a column for an Armenian newspaper called the Armenian Report, called Student Advice Corner, which is really about, again, giving back and trying to make
Right.
information on admissions processes more accessible to different students. And then beyond that, there's an organization called the Armenian Literary Alliance, and I was part of their mentorship cohort
Mm.
past fall. So they paired me with a published writer, and we reworked my poetry together just so a few pieces were more refined.
Very nice. Very nice. Is it fair to ask you to define any sort of stylistic component to your poetry? Is there a style or a that someone might recognize when they read it, or do you feel it's, unique or just maybe a combination of different styles and approaches?
I would say it's a combination. I think a lot of my poetry either gravitates towards more like romantic topics or Armenian topics. It's
Mm.
usually one of the two. Don't ask me why. I definitely understand the Armenian topics
Sure.
more just because of the heritage, but again, this is a side hobby, and
Mm.
they're more short form. But I wouldn't personally know if I have a specific writing style. Maybe I have to go back to my poetry workshop teachers and ask them what
And
they
ask them.
think after seeing everyone else's published works.
We had another poet on our platform a little while back, and I didn't ask her the same question, but it is probably an unfair question to ask any poet. So apologies for that. Danielle, you're going to have so many opportunities. I think they're going to continue to present themselves as a result of your passion and your resilience and your dedication. I know you'll have to at some point really kind of start to refine and think about the legal fields that I think are the most sort of compelling to you. Have you started to go through those mental exercises, Danielle, yet? Are you still really just trying to take in as much as you possibly can? I'm curious as to how you start that refinement process in your mind.
So the way it works in law school when you're targeting these big law jobs post grad is you
Hmm.
actually have to start refining fairly early because we
Mm.
recruit for the internship that turns into a full-time role the first summer of our law school experience, which is
Sure.
3. So I started thinking about this very early on when I entered law school. I'm going to be the first lawyer in my entire extended family. So I think I was somewhat in panic mode, like, okay, telling me I already have to figure out if I'm more corporate minded or
Yeah.
litigation oriented and what are
Yeah.
all things. A lot of that is speaking with attorneys or just taking classes that
Mm.
have certain subject expertise and asking people, okay, if I like this class, what area might I like? So I have found out that I'm much more corporate oriented,
Mm,
and I picked a law firm for post grad that's very transactional in
mm,
nature, that
hmm.
also has a rotation program. So
Oh,
for
cool.
18 months, I'll be able to try out a few different things. I'm mainly eyeing real estate and mergers and acquisitions work right now, and then we'll just see from there.
See where it goes from there. Yeah, yeah. That's good. And it seems very practical, right? And I'm reflecting back to what you just said a moment ago about you didn't have any attorneys even in your extended family. So maybe, you couldn't like turn to your Uncle Frank or your Aunt Sue and say, like, how did it go for you? Or how did it, happen for you, right? You kind of had to again think about it on your own, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. I know your career is likely to have lots of stops along its path. You're really at the beginning, certainly, of your law career, and you have these amazing, creative pursuits and all these other passions that you explore. Danielle, is there an end game here? Is there something that you're driving to, and like Danielle Mikaelian PC, right? Or is it to be a senior partner, or is it to I have no idea, right? So I'm just curious. Has that started to kind of formulate in your mind at some point? Some people it formulates very early, right? They're like, I will be a CEO, but or I will be this, or I will be that. Has some of that started to formulate for you yet, Danielle?
I always tell people that I think it's very difficult to know how you're going to respond to a law firm environment until you
Mm,
get there. And
hmm.
again, just as much as I've interned at these types of firms over my summers, I think it's really different working there full time.
Sure.
So my plan is get there, see how it's going, and then make a determination based off that. And if somehow I'm not thrilled, you look to things like maybe being a general counsel for a company,
Hmm.
or who knows if one of my law school friends starts an initiative someday and they're like, Danielle, come with, right? I, I definitely have made it a priority to also expose myself to the business side of
I
things.
think that's great. Yeah.
I've been in this Harvard Business School class throughout this entire year, which is really, again, their main startup
Mm,
incubator. And last semester, I was the acting as legal counsel to a sports facility that was trying to launch in South Boston. And
mm,
just really having like those types of practical experiences, I was able to pitch with them on pitch day, put together the slide deck and everything, where you just never know where life will take you. But I
right.
believe in having those like practical skills and those practical experiences and just trying to expose myself to various options.
I can tell you from having worked in private equity for about 5 years, and having been involved in many processes for acquisition, divestiture, etc. Having a GC that really understands the business and is willing to invest in understanding the business is just a remarkable thing. I've had the good fortune of been worked with attorneys on M&A deals where having that attorney that does get the business side and wants to get the business side really complements the deal, right? And gave us so many advantages during the process. So I commend what you're doing there. I think it's really important. One of the other delights that I had, Danielle, when you reached out to me and asked to come here and tell your story was that, there's a lot of young women aspiring to follow similar paths as yours. They're maybe thinking about law school, or they're maybe thinking about ways that they can have the types of commitment to community that you have, or want to be advocates, want to have impact. They're not satisfied with the status quo, right? And I definitely get that you're a person who doesn't deal well with the status quo. Um, Tell me about the young women that you hope are coming up behind you. What are your hopes for them? What advice do you have for them, Danielle?
I think that it's important to always analyze your surroundings and really have the mindset of how can I improve upon them.
Mm,
Is are there any steps that can be taken here? Because when you're a little more complacent, as well as long as overall that's fine, but
sure.
it's just not going to lead to the type of impactful change that I've been spearheading for years, because
Hmm.
a lot of the ways I've been able to make a tangible impact is because I go into spaces and I see, oh, this club is inactive. How do we
How do we reactivate it? Yeah.
right? How do we
Yep.
reactivate it? Oh, this initiative needs funding. Okay, let's think of different community stakeholders we can partner with or reach out to or so on. But you always have to be trying to convince yourself like to take it a step further than things
Mm,
already are at. Though that's a lot of pressure. I'm not saying everyone has to do this. I'm just saying if you want to maximize your potential, that's what I would say.
sure.
And then I think overall, my bigger takeaway is just never count yourself out of the game.
Nice.
Again, I just believe in always sending an application in, always reaching out and doing a cold email or whatnot if you want to talk to someone. You just never know. But by doubting yourself and being stuck in this period of self doubt instead of actually affirmatively taking those steps, you're not going to be able to find the type of progress or
Hmm.
you're hoping to achieve.
I love that. I love that. I love the don't count yourself out of the game, right? I think that's great. And I also love what you said about the, let's reactivate these things that are inactive. Let's not be scared to do that, right? Yeah.
Right.
Let's
And there's definitely people around you that are willing to help along
help.
the way as
Exactly.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely look to your community, look to who's around you, and see if you can convince other people to be involved as well. You don't have to do it alone. That's another big pointer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We have been speaking to Danielle Mikaelian. Uh oh, I said your name wrong. Mikaelian. Danielle
You're
Mikaelian.
all good.
I think I would get it right, given the fact that we're both Armenian. But Danielle, you're a leader, you're an advocate, you're a law student, you're a poet. There's so many ways to define you. I don't think it's fair to try to define you. But one thing I do want to say once again is thank you for coming here and telling us your story. I think it was really important for uh, young women to hear it, not just young women, but so many others as well. And we wish you the best of luck. I can't wait to stay in touch with you and watch what you'll be doing over the next months and years. So once again, Danielle Mikaelian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.